Welcome to our Careers in Peacebuilding Talk Story series. My name is José Barzola from the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. Our talk story today will focus on peacebuilding careers in a time of global change and disruption with our special guest, David J. Smith. Thank you for joining us today to learn about the journey into the profession. Today's event will be live streamed on our community Facebook pages through the 100th Infantry Battalion Veterans Education Center, aka Club 100, our the local nonprofit Conflict Resolution Alliance, K2H Honolulu, and the Spark and Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. Thank you again for joining us. Today's event is co-sponsored with the Forage Center for Peacebuilding and Humanitarian Education, Incorporated. That is a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation that provides educational opportunities for students, educators, and professionals to build capacity to work in environments where peacebuilding and humanitarian responses are needed. Today's event will have our guest speaker, David J. Smith, explore options for careers and professional pathways for those pursuing peacebuilding work. He will focus on the present moment. David will consider myriad challenges facing us today: social justice, political polarization, climate change, and the pandemic, and look at the opportunities that come from the present conditions. David J. Smith is currently the president of the Forage Center for Peacebuilding and Humanitarian Education, based in Washington, D.C. The Forage Center offers experiential-based training for those pursuing humanitarian careers. He's also a career coach, working with those seeking peacebuilding careers. David is an adjunct faculty at the Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University in Arlington, Virginia. He was previously a senior program officer and manager at the United States Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C., which was created as a result of the work of the Matsunaga Commission, chaired by our very own Senator Spark Matsunaga in the 1970s. So thank you so much. And to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to our friend, David.
Thank you, Jose. I'm going to share my screen first.
Yep.
And I want to make sure that everyone can see my screen. Jose, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. I am so pleased to be here. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for inviting me, Jose, and the Matsunaga Institute. It's 5 o'clock where I'm in Washington, D.C. So if you're in beautiful Hawaii, it must be about 12 noon. I was in Hawaii back in March, interestingly enough, and I spoke at the Matsunaga Institute. So at that time, I met Jose and Maya Satara-Ning and other people at the Matsunaga Institute. So in a sense, this is full circle. I'm doing something very similar to what I did there for a smaller group that we can do so much more through Zoom. So I'm glad to be with you. And I'm sure a lot of you are based in Hawaii, but some of you may be based elsewhere. So wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad that you are here. I'm glad that Jose read my bio specifically about the time I was at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Senator Matsunaga has a very significant role in the creation of the Institute. As he mentioned, back in the 1970s, he was part of a coalition of senators who advocated for a National Peace Academy. There was a commission that was appointed by President Carter in 1979, of which Senator Matsunaga was the chair. That's why it's called the Matsunaga Commission. Subsequently, there was a report to Congress in 1980 making recommendations for the U.S. Institute.
Join the meeting.
Of which Senator Matsunaga then was a co-sponsor. The Institute came into creation in 1984. So if you're more interested in the history of USIP, I can give you that. But when I was working at USIP, Senator Matsunaga's vision and his spirit was a constant presence in what we were doing. So it's nice to be connected with you all in this way today. So what I want to do this afternoon for you all, but maybe more like this evening for me, is really take a little bit of a tour and exploration of careers in the field of peace building. As Jose mentioned from my own background, I have worked for a number of years at USIP. For the last 7-8 years, I have been a consultant. I've also taught, right now I teach at the Carter School at George Mason, where I teach graduate students. I teach at Drexel University. I've also taught at Georgetown University, and I've done quite a few things and in my career, all related in one way or another to conflict resolution and peace building. Surprisingly, during this period of time, all these things that I've done include be a mediator and as a U.S. Fulbright scholar, and where I taught peace studies overseas. I was frequently kind of posed with the question by students and practitioners, sometimes at the end of an engaging program on what peace building is and how to use conflict resolution skills. I was posed with the idea of, well, how do I get a job doing this? Like, this is really exciting, right? How do I kind of launch my career? Or sometimes people say, how do I get your job? So sometimes people would actually go to me and say, how do I get your job? And, I didn't have a good answer at times. I was really kind of struck by what little the field and those of us who had been in the field had really kind of focused on when it came to careers. And it really got me to think, particularly when I was at the U.S. Institute of Peace and then afterwards, of do we do enough for not only young college students, graduate students, but practitioners in presenting them with career ladders, we'll say, approaches that they can take to doing this work. One of the things that strikes me in a lot of experiences, particularly when you talk to college students, is that you spend 4 years or maybe more or maybe less as an undergraduate or graduate student, maybe at University of Hawaii, Manoa, or maybe somewhere else. And you get very excited about peace building and issues relating to human rights and curbing violence and mediation and global issues. And then you graduate and then you think, I can't do these things anymore. And we haven't necessarily helped you figure out how do you take that, we'll say, on the other side as you cross the stage. And so really I have focused a lot in the last couple of years in trying to help students, graduates, and even professionals. I was on the phone this morning with a professional who is in his 60s who is trying now to move from federal government work to doing conflict resolution work, how you can really take this and make a meaningful career out of it. So that's what we're going to do. So let me start off by one of the things that Jose had mentioned is that there's a lot going on in the world. And we have to kind of put some truth and reality in what's going on. We have issues of need around the world. We have issues of overcrowding. We have issues of the economy. I mean, because of the pandemic, the global economy is not really doing very well. It's not just in the United States, it's in other parts of the world, particularly in the developing world, in the global South. We don't read about that and hear about that. I think in the US in particular, our news is very US centric. Certainly we have climate issues and the things that are coming about because of climate change that we're facing. Once again, not front and center as it should be, maybe in 2021 when we're on the other side of the pandemic, we can be looking at these. Certainly we have issues of public health. This is actually a photograph from the Ebola crisis, but the way that these healthcare workers are masked up, you're familiar with seeing that in hospitals in Hawaii and other places, and dealing with tremendous loss around the world and certainly with Americans. I put this in here just to remind people. I want to send a message that you should make sure that you're not texting while you're driving. So just a little public service message, right? But we have issues with conflict among people, maybe because of their faith systems and their belief systems and so forth. So maybe another way of saying that. Certainly in the United States, we have for several years struggled with the role of immigrants, you would say, and how to respond to immigrant needs. We have struggled with how we are to treat and to serve and to support those who are undocumented. There have been U.S. federal policies, government policies that not everybody has agreed with, but the United States is a country of immigrants. Maybe it's not that present generation, but I look at a place like Hawaii. Hawaii is a country of immigrants. I mean, if you look at the Japanese and Chinese population, even though they might have immigrated in the 19th century, those roots do still go back as people who were not native to the area. We have issues of aging. In some societies, the challenges is that we have such a large aged population that the future of how to support that population is coming into question, right? And so in many countries, we have large immigrants, we have a booming kind of youth population, youth bulge in some countries, while in some countries, particularly European countries, for instance, that you have the opposite. You have smaller numbers of youth, larger numbers of people who are older. And it took me 8 slides to get to violence, war and violence, right? These are all the other issues that we have dealing with. All of these issues have conflict ramifications to them. And I didn't start off with violence. I think if maybe 25 years ago, we were looking at the field and looking what we responded to, we might start more with the violence and not with the other things. But we've got all these things going on. And this is a humanitarian worker, somebody who's actually, I think he works for the ICRC. And how do we respond then? This is you. How do you respond to what's going on? And so what we're going to talk about is the ways that respond and the careers that you can have in order to respond in thinking about basically what's the future. What's the future of your work going to be, and what's the future of how you're going to play a role. At any time through this, because I have my chat box open also. If you want to put in a question, I might not get to it right in the moment, but I will get to it at a certain point. I'll just kind of take a pause and look at some of the questions. I see a question from Cameron and some other questions there. So I will come to those. I do want to create a little bit of conversation. Let me get a little far into my presentation, then we can step back a little bit. So the first thing I want to tell you is, in many respects, when it comes to careers, we don't know what the future is going to look like. 60% of jobs 10 years from now haven't been created yet. And this was quoted by Thomas Fry, who is the former editor of the Futurist magazine. And when we hear things like that, we automatically think in terms of technology, right? We think about all the jobs that have been created because of social media and because of artificial intelligence and all these things that are affecting everything that we do. We can't even predict what we're going to need in the future because things change so rapidly. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when there were TV repair people, right? And travel agents and so forth, right? But this change in what people are doing is not really limited to technology. It really affects every aspect of what we do. I think, for instance, that because of the increasing numbers of people who are older and living longer, I was listening to, I think it was on the NewsHour last night or some show where they were saying is that people that are born today, 50% of them will live to 100. Isn't that amazing? At least in the global north, that is in Europe and Western Europe. 50% of them will live to 100. So serving that population, right? And so one of the burgeoning fields are home health aides and other types of aides that really we didn't have 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? This kind of human services type of work and working directly with people. So why I emphasize this is that we can't really plan for the job itself, but we can plan for the skills that are necessary to respond to what we think the future is going to look like. So the future is going to need people that have to take a humanistic approach to things. If the future has to respond to the needs of climate, then we can develop skills that are related to that, though we don't necessarily know what the job's going to be called. So one of the things I always want to remind students and other people that when you're thinking about a career, we tend to think about the job that I'm going to be hired for, right? So this notion that I'm going to find a job and they're going to hire me. That's going to be where I'm going to start. And I understand that. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. And I think that's often, certainly when you're just out of college. But I also think there's something about entrepreneurship. And I think there's something about creating our own work, creating our own space. Many of you who are on this may be entrepreneurial types and starting your own work. This is P.E.A.C.E Coffee, which is a coffee chain in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. There are about 6 stores, 6 restaurants, 6 coffee places. I don't think they're operating right now because of the pandemic, but it's fair. It sells fair trade coffee. I mean, I know I was in Honolulu just 6 months ago. I know you've got places like that in Honolulu and Hawaii also. But the idea that everyone's going to get a job versus people who are going to say, I'm interested in peace. I'm interested in reducing violence. I'm interested in fairness and fair trade and social justice. maybe I can start a business. Maybe I can start like a coffee shop. Then if, yes, you can do those things too, right? So don't think that we're all looking for a job to be hired. There's something about entrepreneurship that's really important. I often do an exercise with college students where we focus. I give every college student $500,000 pretend money. And we actually go through an exercise of what kind of entrepreneurial business could you come up with? This along the same line, this is actually a little cafe off of Central Park called Peace Food Cafe. Could you have a restaurant? Now this is a little bit different. This is the Peace Tech Lab, which used to be part of the U.S. Institute of Peace. So USIP in Washington, for the last 20 years, has really done a lot of work in promoting the tech side of things, right? Looking at social media, looking at early warning systems to determine when there's going to be violence, looking at how to respond through media, and all these different things. There's a lot there. And then about 10 years ago, the Peace Tech Lab was kind of, we'll say, split off from USIP and set up. So this is a lab that's looking at conflict, looking at technology and how technology impacts conflict, how technology can be used to lessen conflict and differences, right? Foster more cooperation, foster human rights, foster these things that we all hold very dearly. And why it strikes me is that often when people think about careers in peace, they often coming from, we'll say, the social sciences and the humanities, not realizing that if I've got a degree in IT, even a degree in IT can help me get a job in peace building, right? So, I mean, if you're in here and you're an undergraduate at University of Hawaii and you're, studying IT, you're thinking, well, this is not for me. But it is for you, right? If you're studying engineering, this is for you. If you're studying sciences, this is for you, right? There are things that you can do, and we'll talk about some of those things shortly. This actually is my son. So I show my students I am a proud parent, we'll say, by my children, right? This is my son who was in the Peace Corps. So for many American college students just graduate, there are things that they can do. He's a returned Peace Corps volunteer. He's in Namibia, which is in Southern Africa, from 2016 to 2018, where he taught mathematics. And he was a mechanical engineering major from University of Maryland. And then he went into Peace Corps to teach, right? So you can take something. There are things about the Peace Corps that he thinks is somewhat controversial. He's not totally in line with everything the Peace Corps stands for. I must tell you, there are a lot of people looking at the role the Peace Corps places in colonization and so forth, and he's been a bit of a critic. But to show you that there are lots of different avenues, and Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, these are all avenues too. We can kind of talk to them too for when you're coming right out of college. I like this comic strip. I don't know how many of you either know zits or get zits, or I don't know what comics, if people even read comics anymore, what's looked at in newspapers in Honolulu and so forth. But, and I'll just give you a second kind of read through it. If you're kind of a young person and you're thinking about what you're going to do and where you're going to go, so I'm just going to give you a second to read it. This actually may actually speak to many of you, right? In a sense, in thinking about what it is that, what your future is going to be, right? I think, and maybe it's a thing about being a parent. I imagine many of you on this call are parents. So like me, you tend to save a lot of things, right? Maybe things that you shouldn't be saving, right? And not recognizing that our kids are never going to care about the things that we're saving necessarily. But also the idea that that careers of today, this idea of kind of finding that place and staying in that place, right? And and not moving out of your own location, right? I think is really, particularly for people who care about the things that we care about, is really not what's happening, and may not even be practical in some respects. This idea that your backpack is where your stuff is, and you're carrying it around the world between gigs, right? A lot of people who come into this field are already coming with that worldview, that the idea, and one of the things I'll mention at the very end, is the idea of going to where the conflicts are, going to where the situations are. So people will come to me and say, well, you know, I want to work with refugees, and that's really important to me, and I want to help people who are migrating, and I'll say, okay, I mean, you can do that in the United States, but you can also go to the island of Lesbos in Greece and do that and work on the front lines. You can work for a humanitarian agency in a part of the world that is working in a refugee camp. So this idea of going out and doing those things become really important. So maybe some of you kind of maybe resonate with this comic strip a little bit. So where are you going? So let me look at some of the things that people have posted in here. I got a just question for people, see how they're good with geography. And maybe you can just put it in the chat box. I will tell you, this is my son. This is back my son, but what is my son looking at? Does anybody know geography enough to know where he is and what he's looking at? So just put in the chat box if you know. I'm not going to give you a reward. I'm just trying to get a sense of how good people are in seeing things. Not Brazil. Nope. Nice guess. Anybody else? I'm going to say this, and they say, oh, I thought so. He's actually in Cape Town, South Africa. He's on the top of Table Mountain looking down. So Cape Town's got this wonderful harbor, and he's looking into the harbor. If you ever get to Cape Town, the thing you absolutely must do is take a trip to Robben Island. Does anybody, when I say Robben Island, can somebody put in the chat box what they know about Robben Island? Nobody's put anything yet? Robben Island. If I said Nelson Mandela, then maybe you would remember what Robben Island is. Yes, where Mandela and other political prisoners were held in Robben Island. So if you go to Robben Island, you should get a tour of Robben Island, which remarkably is from former prisoners and former jailers, right? Together. They work together, which is what Mandela wanted, to give you a tour, and you get to see Mandela's cell and the experiences that they had there. So I'm going to go through some of these questions. Frank was recently in Honolulu, located Los Angeles. He's leaking consultant, self-care. I have an MA, conflict resolution, worked in violence prevention. Thanks for, yeah, Frank, and you might want to reach out to me a little bit afterwards, because what I'm talking is very, very kind of broad and generic. Might not be dealing with your particular, I work a lot with graduate students because I teach at the Carter School, which is a master's degree in conflict resolution. And I know the program at Dominguez Hills. Actually, I know the director, and I know some of the faculty there. And so thank you for joining us. And Cynthia's from Orlando, and you subscribe to my blog. That's wonderful. And I'm glad you're in Orlando. Cynthia, I wonder if you're connected with, you know, the work of Valencia College in Orlando. Valencia College is a community college in Orlando who has they have a peace institute there. They do some fabulous work there. Makiki, so Charles is a Makiki, a public policy mediator for 35 years, former litigator. That's great. Overlapping, and you're kind of in my world, right? I spent a lot of time as a mediator. Cameron is from Manoa. She's participating in a certificate, graduate, I guess it's graduate certificate at the Matsunaga, and she's a DoD employee. Yeah, and you know, one of the things to say is that a lot of, we often say, well, that's, you know, defense does that and peace does that, but you see a lot of intersectionality today, actually, and you see a lot of people who go into military environments and are trying to make reforms. And actually, the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, has a peacekeeping institute where they teach military people how to approach things in a peace-building way. So, all right, so keep putting stuff in there, and then I'll come back to it. And Carol is studying Asian affairs. If you want to put in anything about yourself, go ahead. I'll probably read it out at Manoa. So I'm glad you're here. What was that Institute for the Military? It's actually the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and it's called the Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Institute, P.E.A.C.E. So if you just Google P.E.A.C.E, you can find out about it. So let me keep going here. So who does the work of peace building? And then we'll define it a little bit. So I kind of just start with a list. So, and I think if you're in the field, when I say a non-governmental organization, you probably know what that is, right? That's an organization, almost always a not-for-profit, that is often working in an international sphere, working to promote human rights or the welfare of women, or healthcare, or something very, very specific that they're working. And these are private organizations versus intergovernmental organizations like the UN, right? Or the World Health Organization, which are IGOs. Certainly governments are involved in peace building work also. You might not think about necessarily with the US government, but other governments are much more active involved. There are even some governments that have offices of peace education, where they're promoting peace education. So some of the governments are doing that. Certainly religious groups. So a lot of what you see around the world, particularly from the NGO standpoint, come from organizations that are out in the field doing important work. So I think about Catholic Relief Services as one, Mennonite Central Committee. These are all, have religious affiliation groups. Military, as I was saying, increasingly, particularly if you work in civil affairs, you're more apt to be not motivating from the barrel of a gun as much from persuasion. And so you're using the skills in order to convince people, to bring them along, to do the right thing. Educators, right? So I'm an educator. A lot of people, and I know a lot of what the Matsunaga Institute does focuses on education. Education is working with the little ones, right? Preschool, elementary school, and peace education. The college and university level, working in peace and conflict studies, the graduate level, and I'm going to show you another graph in a minute that'll kind of pull this all out a little bit more. Individuals, civil society, which is kind of everything except government that's out there. Some societies have much more vibrant civil society efforts, some have less. Business, right? So people are surprised to hear business, but a lot of businesses are doing fair trade work, protecting human rights. Some aren't, right? And so we can criticize them. There's something called a B corporation, benefit corporation. So a lot of businesses are trying to promote different aspects that we would call peace building through the work that they do. Arts and music. So people who do music work, we'll talk about that. Who else, right? Anybody want to put anything else in the chat box? Anybody that I forgot that you can think about? Well, let me go to the next graph because this may get you to think about it a little bit. So this is actually and you might have seen this, and I've made some changes, and I'm going to show you another one. So this was developed by John Paul Lederach, and those of you who are peace study students or conflict resolution students, you probably are familiar with Lederach's work. Lederach started his academic career at Eastern Mennonite University, went on to the University of Notre Dame, now is retired. He is one of the the 5 leaders of the field, has written a number of books. He's really done a lot of work in Latin America. Most recently, he was in Nepal for about 6 or 7 years doing work there. He's focused a lot on this notion of conflict transformation, right? And so when he was at the University of Notre Dame, at the Kroc Institute there, he and a graduate student, Katie Mansfield, who actually is now teaches at Eastern Mennonite University, kind of went to their graduate students and kind of got an elicitive, came to them and said, tell me what you're doing. And then they kind of framed it as defining what peace building could be. So if you pick up peace building as all the things we do in society to create stability, to lessen violence, to improve conditions, to respect human rights, all these things are kind of part of it. So this wheel here gives you a sense of what that looks like, right? So if you think about trauma healing, right? So you think about after conflict, a lot of this is kind of post-conflict, people who experience high levels of trauma after war and violence. But a lot of it is sexual violence. The trauma healing is really important. Humanitarian action, so if you think about groups like the International Community Red Cross, who are going in, people who are working with refugees. You think about development, so international development. So funding and training that we do in order to help society support themselves so they can live and feed themselves, that's done through international development. Some of these are done through organizations, sometimes they're done at a small level. Looking at law and advocacy, like human rights work, looking at dialogue work, right, individual one-on-one. So what I've done is I've created this, and on the outside, I've put, we'll say, organizations that do that type of work. It struck me that the Mediation Center of the Pacific, which is based in Hawaii, is a community mediation center. So this is not all the international stuff necessarily, right? The things that go on in our own community, where we have challenges in our own community that we have to find a middle ground becomes important. DAI actually is a development organization. David is asking in Washington, D.C. So they get funding from USAID. And there are a number of organizations who are thinking that DAI is for profit. They get funding and they're then doing projects in countries around the world. I'm just looking, Ariana is a graduate student at GW studying global health epidemiology. I'm interested in working to turn into these people. So trauma healing, right? The kind of work of trauma healing is really important. And, you know, Ariana, you might want to kind of reach back to me individually, give you some ideas there. Gang violence work in Los Angeles. You know, so once again, we are often looking at very, very localized conflict. We're not just always focusing on kind of the big things. I've got Seeds of Peace in here. I don't know if anybody saw that. How many of you are familiar with Seeds of Peace? There are two Seeds of Peace. The one I got here is the one that's based in Honolulu, right? So Seeds of Peace is an organization, I know Jose knows Seeds of Peace, that really is doing education work with a lot of youth in the Honolulu area. That's a peace building organization. All right. So what is a peace job? So I use this term, I started off by, I'll show you my book again that I wrote several years ago, looking at careers called peace jobs. And so one of the things that I want to get you to think about is, we'll say, a broader lens of what it is to work in the field, right? So there was a point in time when working in the field was, this is the former Secretary General of the United Nations, right? This is Kayla Mueller, who was a humanitarian worker. So we have diplomats, humanitarian workers. Kayla Mueller was killed about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I guess now, maybe longer. She in Syria. She was working for Doctors Without Borders. So diplomats, Ban Ki-moon, Kayla Mueller, people who do mediation work, and then activists. That seemed to be what we thought about when people did peace work, right? Kind of following in that, right? But what I would say is that educators are doing peace building work. And I intentionally put an educator who's doing mathematics here, right? So people would think, well, what does mathematics have to do with peace? And I would say, it has a lot to do with peace. If you can write and you can read and you can compute, right? And you can figure out numbers, you can work, and you're educated, and you can support yourself and you can support other people. This is the prevention of violence and the prevention of deprivation, right? If you look at people who find themselves incarcerated, there are a lot of reasons to that. Certainly, there is a disproportionate number of people, certain marginalized communities are incarcerated. That certainly is an issue. But a lot of people are incarcerated is because they don't have sufficient education to support themselves and their families. So I would say anybody who's a teacher, notwithstanding whatever they're teaching, are in many respects, they're doing peace building work. Healthcare providers, right? Right now, you think of the people that are working on the pandemic, right? Are dealing with trauma. You're having, lots of really tremendous anxiety, stress, loss that's going on. People have to be comforted through the trauma. Think about a healthcare provider, a nurse, a doctor, whatever, who's working in a part of the country where there's a lot of violence, working in an emergency room, right? What they have to do is they're often spending a lot of time giving bad news to people, right? And trying to help them understand what's going on. They're doing trauma healing work in that way. You can certainly do this overseas too. You can do this with refugees. That becomes important. IT, right? Once again, somebody said, well, I don't know, I don't do peace building work. I build websites. But every organization that I know that does peace building work, every NGO needs somebody to build a website. They need to know how to use social media. They know how to take technology and use it as a force for good, right? So if you have this tech background, merging that with a peace building background can open opportunities. And certainly artists and musicians, right? As we said before, this is the way that we represent what's going on in our world, right? The way people come to understand it through music and art. There's a tremendous role of that. All of these are very, lend themselves to very specific fields at times of things that you can do. So this is a model that I want you to think about a little bit. This is something that I have in my book, and it's a way of us kind of coming to understand the work that we do. So to look at the concentric circles here for a minute, when I think about micro work, what I'm thinking about are people that are working one-on-one with somebody, right? So you're working with a refugee. You're working with an individual in some way in order to alleviate violence and conflict. You work with youth offenders, and you're working with one person, one young man or one young woman or a trans person, and you're trying to get them to figure out what is it that should be doing, right? And you're helping them on that individualized basis. Meso is often working with groups then, right? So we're thinking about working with people who are going through change, where there's dissension. The Black Lives Matters movement is really a group movement at one level, right? So if you think about large communities or marginalized Black and brown populations, quite often, you're working with those groups. Maybe you're working as an advocate, you're working to advise them, you're working them to change policy, you're working at that level. Then there's the macro, which tends to be kind of this global international, right? So, you want to work at the UN, we'll say, or kind of a global organization. Now, these overlap each other, right? And sometimes you can be in more than one world, but they often have very, very different organizations you work with, different pathways to careers, different ways of doing it. Then there's direct versus indirect action. Direct action, which is on the right, is more of this job focuses specifically on lessening conflict, improving human rights. But there's indirect action. That is, the things that you're doing have a indirect effect on what's going on, and it's a positive peace building effect. So for instance, being an educator. So if you're say you're a elementary school educator and you teach physical education, and rather than emphasizing, we'll say, competitive sports, you're emphasizing cooperative sports with your students. And there's a role for competitiveness, but we don't emphasize cooperativeness as often. So you're kind of having cooperative activities with your students. Well, your direct action is getting them exercise, right? But the indirect action is that these young people are now starting to appreciate the benefits of working together, right? They're starting to work as a team, right? I think about, there's a lot of studying that's going on between the intersectionality of sports and peace building. So for instance, the idea that you can use sports as a means to getting groups to work together, right? So, you could have a team, a soccer game where you have Palestinians against Israelis. Or you could have a team where Team A and Team B, and Team A is both Palestinians and Israelis, and Team B is both Palestinians and Israelis. And so what they have to do is they have to work together as a team in order to score, notwithstanding their political identity or their philosophical identity or their ethnic identity or whatever. So that's indirect. So we often have to think more about the indirect because there's a lot more potential in that. Does that seem, you think about that a little bit. And this can work in many, many different places that we don't often recognize. So talking a little bit about Gen Z, I've got just a couple more slides I'm going to get through, and then we'll have some open for questions. Many of you are Gen Zers, some of you are millennials. One of the things when we're looking at the world of work, we're always looking at the world of work in terms of the values that people bring into it that kind of create the types of jobs that are out there. So we are going through this tremendous change with COVID. it's going to be really interesting on the other side of this, of what sticks and doesn't stick, what is changed, right? But I would say people who are Gen Z, which is kind of the current college population, the values they have, for instance, the value of maybe having workplace balance, of being able to commit to certain things, as this shows you, will then construct the type of work that's out there. Every generation has different values. I always want to remind people that when you're looking for work, and some of you are in change right now, that is, you're leaving something else, or you're on the cusp of looking for it, is that always take care of yourself. I always say this before I talk about strategies for looking for work. Take time out from it, eat well, exercise, engage in mindfulness, that might be meditation, connecting with family and friends, prioritize the right thing, take some perspective, and look for emotional support. Looking for work is often very taxing, very challenging on your ego and your self-esteem at times. And you really need to keep everything together in order for it to be successful. This is just something for you to think about a little bit. And this is really directed maybe more to college and high school students that I might have on the line in thinking about a career. Sometimes when I start with people in looking at what they should be doing, I want them to identify something that maybe they're passionate about or brings them meaning. Now, I'm not saying that that's the be all and end all. That is, you have to find a job that brings you passion and meaning all the time. But having that kind of lone star that you can kind of focus on will give you motivation. You have to get the right education. So being in college, it doesn't make a difference. You don't have to study peace studies. You can study many different things. Engaging activities. So engaging in activities, for instance, outside of school, in school, become important clubs. Finding your community, C is for community, finding other people that think the way you do. Those of us who've done this work for a long time often recognize that sometimes we're at it alone. We have rough days, and it's good to have your peeps, people around you that can support you. And then finally, I mentioned this idea of the environment, right? If you came to me and you're in Honolulu and you came to me and says, I want to work for a, kind of an NGO, government, State Department, I want to do that kind of high diplomacy set, I'm going to say, when are you moving to Washington, D.C., right? And if you came to me and you said, well, I'm interested in Pacific Rim affairs, things that are going on the West Coast, working in kind of native communities, I would say maybe Hawaii is the best place for you to be, right? So often we have to be prepared to kind of go where it is. Here's another, getting you to think a little bit. Anybody recognize anybody in this photograph? Just put in the chat box if you recognize anybody in this photograph. I'm not going to give any more hints than that. Nobody? You're not looking carefully enough. All right, so when I tell you who's in the photograph, some of you are going to say, oh, I knew it. Anybody recognize this gentleman right here? Martin Luther King. Thank you, Cameron. It's Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King Jr., this is when he was a student at Morehouse College in Atlanta. About 1944, he was about 15 or 16 years old at the time. And during World War II, many colleges kind of reduced their age limit to get in because a lot of the men were overseas, so they wanted to bring in more and more men in college. So he was, it wasn't easy. Martin Luther King was a brilliant man. He went on and got a PhD from Boston University. One of the things I guess this is a college professor of me saying he's sitting in the front of the classroom and he's paying attention, he's listening. And I will tell you that if you sit in the front of the classroom, you're never going to stand in the back, you're never going to sit in the back of the bus. Okay. So, engage, participate, listen, be part of what's going on. I think that was really important to King and how he was able to do the things he did. So talking about just COVID impact about work, because people have been kind of asking about this a little bit. In regards to education, there's a shift happening due to COVID restrictions on online education, creating a need for more online education around peace work. Thank you, Frank. Good timing. So I'll first talk about what's going on in hiring right now. And this is like everywhere. So it's not like our field, which has many different tentacles in different ways or different anywhere else, right? So generally speaking, the rule was always it took you 6 months, average 6 months to find work in kind of a moderate economy, not a hot economy, right? Pre-COVID world. Right now, it's even slower in some segments. Organizations that deal with soft money, that means money that can be moved and can be changed. Some of that soft money is going away. Hard money stays. If the job was going to be hired by soft money, a lot of positions are going away because organizations don't want to commit to it because they have no revenue coming in. So higher education is suffering. Lots of development organizations are suffering, lots of them, because they have no cash stream coming out, or they have no way of raising funds in the work that they do. It's a lot slower onboarding also, because you're going to be working from home. WFH, you're going to be working from home, so the whole process is different. How it's going to look in a post-COVID world, I think that's still kind of up in the air. I think in some respects, some of the things that we might have thought about before will probably stay in some of that. All right. So I'm going to go through these steps a little quicker because I want to make sure that I have some time for questions and if people want to open their mics a little bit. So one of the things I would say is that when you're looking for work, having a schedule is really important, having weekly and long-term goals and sticking by them. So now we're talking about actually looking for work. And so this idea of kind of, you know, you're going to do certain things on certain dates, holding yourself accountable becomes very important. I spent a lot of time with my own clients and students focusing on this. You know, if you're graduating in May and it's November, you're thinking, what are the things that I have to do between now and then, right? So figuring out when is it that I need to find work, or maybe you're not graduating, maybe you're about ready to leave a job, right? That checklist becomes important. I actually am really big in worksheets with my clients and my students. So developing a timeline, different skills and aptitudes, networking, working on a CV, these types of things. And I'm going to leave this PowerPoint with the Matsunaga Institute so you can come back to it. These are all ways in which you can kind of start to frame what you want to do. So having a worksheet becomes really important in helping you develop more of an action plan. This is a checklist that I use, still based on P.E.A.C.E. One of the things that I would say, and we're not going to spend time with this, is that the things that we focus on in careers is what your resume look like, what your cover letter look like, what are your references, what are your social media. But we also need to spend time on what we would call the personal presentation, which I'll mention in a minute, like what you look like, what your attitude is, what your elevator speech is. These are things that you kind of need to dig deeper on at times. Networking is really important. I'm a big believer in networking. This gives you a sense of the different types of networking. Sometimes networking is just laying out the land, just finding out what's there. So you might go to a conference, not with any particular objective. Sometimes the objective is learning something specific. You'll go to your conference or you go to a meeting and you want to learn something for specific. Sometimes it's very strategic, right? You really want to go to meet somebody and you really have, you're looking for work, right? So you're not always thinking about the same way. And then the types, formal, informal, unplanned, virtual. A lot of virtual right now. And even virtual networking can work if you go to a conference. One of the conferences I want to recommend, and I'm going to put it in the chat here, is PeaceCon 2020, which is a conference by the Alliance for Peacebuilding, which is going to happen in about 2 weeks. That's something you can register for. It's not that expensive, and it's online. It's about networking. It's the DC peacebuilding community, but it is very much of a global conference. And I'm presenting there, doing a session on careers. Getting a job is more the weak links. Rather, it's somebody you know rather than applying directly. So I want to remind people that that's often the best way. Actually, it's Peace, P.E.A.C.E. I kind of, PeaceCon, sorry about that. LinkedIn, those of you who are professionals, who are a little bit, seasoned, know the importance of LinkedIn. I know some people are not big into using LinkedIn, but I must tell you, in kind of the more institutionalized aspects of the field, development, humanitarian, education, government, so forth, LinkedIn is the means there. The STAR method of interview questions. I know we're not going to talk about interviewing questions here, but the idea that what this really says in a nutshell is that when you talk about yourself in an interview, you've really got to point to specific things that you've done and the actions and the results that have come from it. I was on a call this afternoon with a colleague, a student of mine, who is actually in Dubai. So it's amazing. I was in Dubai early this afternoon, and today I'm in Hawaii. So, you know, what so much for this fantastic global world, we can be anywhere. And she is applying to the Henry Luce fellowship program. And so we were going over questions with her about what they might ask, because she's doing her interview next week. And we were talking about storytelling, being very, very specific. And I think I've got, I think I got something about storytelling later on, and talking about a story about what she's done, right? So people understand, not just saying what you've done, but talking about what you've done. This is some tips on resumes. I'll give this to the Matsunaga Center. This is somebody's resume I found online. He's somewhat of a famous guy. I don't know if he actually wrote this resume, but he does comply with most of the rules of what a good resume is supposed to look like. Your presentation, this is actually my daughter, and dress, mannerism, attitude, elevator stilt, interviewing skills. One of the things that I want to say is that when you apply for work, making sure that your culture and their culture match. My daughter has wonderful purple hair. I guess it's pink and not so purple, but she wants to be an elementary school teacher, and I think that works today. It might have not worked 25 years ago. So, you know, do you dress better or less? How do you fit into that culture becomes important for work. Informational interviews, I can talk a little bit about that maybe offline if you're interested in what they are. This is where you kind of get to know somebody. Storytelling, I mentioned about storytelling. There's a link to storytelling. Crafting a good story is really helpful looking for work. Online, a lot of people want to look for jobs online, and I think there's an advantage to that, but it can be taxing. I really believe in the field broadly of conflict and peace building, getting to know people and connecting on that one-on-one is best. But you can do things online, recognizing that there's a good time and a bad time to do it, making sure you find good sites that you go to. Idealist, a lot of you are probably familiar with Idealist. It tends to be not-for-profit. Daybook tends to be government policy jobs in the Washington area. Relief tends to be international NGO type jobs, if you're interested in that. These are all places that you can go. This is about what you want to do when you're looking for work. It's a job. Organize yourself. Celebrate when you do something well. Always be on, that is prepared for opportunities. Get out and about, and getting turned down can be good because you can really learn something from it. Invest in yourself. You know, this is, I want to put this in here just to remind you that the future of peace building is always about this intersectionality that's going on. So who would have said that climate change, migration would intersect with violence 25 years ago? So as people are moving to cities, they have to move out. There's less and less space. You're seeing more and more violence. And the peace building work will be mainstreamed, more creative applications. Soft skills will be important. So not so much the hard skills, but the kind of the humanistic skills are still really important in our field. This is, I'll leave this and I'll send this. This is a student of mine, Joshua Manua. Joshua Mahuna is a Hawaiian. He went to Hawaii Pacific University. He was a student of mine. I have a feeling that this photograph is from Hawaii. I just don't know where. So somebody who's looking at probably will tell me where it's from. And he now works for the Department of Defense as a regional advisor. He has a master's degree, and he's great to connect with. If you want to connect with Joshua, let me know, and I can connect you with. But he's a great guy. Like I said, he's a native Hawaiian, and he wrote a really great paper looking at native Hawaiian conflict resolution processes. And I can't remember the words of how some of you will know, and how those cultural processes can be mainstream. So he wrote a really good paper that he had published on that, if you're interested in that. So how indigenous processes can be applied. So that's going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think we've got at least a few minutes. So Let's do this. If people want to open their mic, I am fine with that, because when you open your mic, you'll gravitate towards the top. We've got maybe 5 minutes if anybody wants to ask a question. It's overlooking the windward side of the island. Thank you. There you go. I can't pronounce it. Ho'oponopono, right? Is that it? Okay.
Ho'oponopono.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. He wrote a great paper on that. If you're interested, I can get the paper to you. Just email me directly and I'll get that to you. But do people have particular questions or things that I didn't cover that they're interested in when it comes to peace building work, things about themselves? We've got a few minutes. Just open your mic. Go ahead, Thomas, and open your mic.
I just gotta give them access, but I can tell you from the chat, we have a couple of questions right there.
I don't see the questions in my.
Okay, no.
I'll hear a new message. Please send me the document. Yeah.
Oh no, one of the questions was from Frank. In regards to education, does the shift happening due to COVID restrictions and online education creating a need for more online education around peace work?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're seeing, one of the challenges I think is that a lot of our work is particularly experiential in nature. And what that means is that experiences become really important in learning. I'm an experiential educator. I have an NGO. We do humanitarian training. So that doesn't lend itself to the online world as easily, right? So doing a simulation or something, but it is adapting, and you are seeing a lot of that going on now. I think we're kind of into that. What online education does provide us is provide us a global connectivity that we never had before. So it's great to be in a room. I wish I knew where you all from, because I'm sure you're not all from Hawaii. And so we can share practices and approaches we're seeing around the world.
Thank you.
Other questions.
We had asked a DAI question mark.
I said it's a Washington. I don't know what the acronym stands for, but it's a Washington, D.C. based development organization. Okay. That have offices around the world, and they fund projects around the world, and they're funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development. David, can you share your contact page again? I'll put my email in again, and that would be anything that you're asking me about sending you things or whatever, like you'd like. Why don't you email me, and then I can get that to you tomorrow. Right? So some of you are asking for Joshua's paper. I can get that to you, or I can connect you directly up with Joshua. I think he'd love to talk to you. Other questions that folks have?
I think the only other question we had in our chat was from Ariana, but you had mentioned for her to reach out to you separately.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I know we are at 5. Well, 5 my time, or 6 my time. 1 your time, and some of you may be on lunch break. So Thomas, you're pointing. Did you want to say something?
Oh, he's let me unmute him because
yeah, okay, great. Good, Thomas.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
David, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, and aloha from Hawaii. So for us old timers who've indirectly and directly been in the peacemaking, peace building field for decades and have retired from their principal occupation, in my case, the legal field, mm-hmm. What tips or ideas might you have about where we can put the ideals that we still carry and our experience and energy to good use?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I get a lot of that in Washington, particularly. You get a lot of people who retire from government and whatever. It's interesting. I was talking to a former EEO lawyer on the phone today who's retiring. He's a little bit older than I am. And, part of it is this, I get a lot of people are saying kind of what you're saying, Thomas, is that whatever it is that they did, now they want to really do that good work, right? That important work, and finding a place to do it. So one of the things I recognize, it depends on where your emphasis is. If it's skill-based, like you're a mediator, look for community mediation opportunities. Get involved in a community mediation center, get training, offer training, teach. Some of it is volunteer, some of it may be paid. That's a way of doing it. Look at what you can do in local schools and teaching, right, and volunteering there. One of the things is don't necessarily look for conflict resolution organizations as much as looking for groups that are dealing with people's differences, right? So often people will say, well, there's no conflict resolution because I'm looking for the word conflict resolution, peace building. And I'm saying, don't look for that. look for places where people are bringing differences to the table and they're struggling, and where you can apply your skills, even if it's on a volunteer basis. And Thomas, feel free to email me directly, and maybe I can give you some more ideas too. We can talk again.
Thank you, David.
Okay. Are we good? Any other questions? I don't know if we've got more time. If we don't, Jose, I'm.
Yeah, well, I just have a couple closing words, but I do want to thank you so much. And yes, I will be asking you for everything that you've offered, and definitely your website. I will be adding that all into the
Okay. All right.
YouTube, and so people can get further information about this.
Well, I wish everybody a wonderful Thanksgiving, at least those of you who are U.S. side, a wonderful yet distant Thanksgiving. It's not Thanksgiving that we normally have. Everyone should feel safe. Jose and I were talking about, there's a lot of excitement and euphoria because there's vaccines on the horizon, but we still have a ways to go in this pandemic. So, still be safe, right?
Most definitely. And I just want to say thank you, David, for allowing us to learn and explore options for careers and professional pathways for those pursuing peace building work. Honestly, it's really something, definitely not a field that people normally think about, including myself. That was on my mind growing up or applying to college. And yes, I want to be a peace builder is something I actually personally acknowledged later on in life as part of my journey, and not so much a work of my life. And I think really understanding that, getting the work mindset off of it is a good way to kind of truly embrace the process. It's more of a journey. It's part of your life.
Yeah.
It turns out it's something, it's just something I've been doing. And I realized it's something I've been doing, and I believe a lot of people are doing without really acknowledging.
Right. That's important. They don't know they're doing it, but they are doing it. Right. Yeah.
And just honestly, just getting into the mindset of like not being reactive, being proactive. Well, there you go. Doing peace building work right there. I think it's so I think it's a mindset that truly helps going into the field a bit more with more ease. But yeah, thank you for your kindness, your leadership.
Thank you.
Journey into the profession. And
I forgot to put on my my beads that I got when I visited you, so I want to put them on as we're leaving. Remind me what they're called again, Jose?
Kukui nut lei.
Kukui nut beads. I was given this when I visited, so. I'm as at least a temporary Hawaiian. Aloha to everyone.
I love that you were one of our last in-person speakers before the pandemic began, and you're one of our last speakers for the year. So I think it's definitely appropriate. And then to our audience, last but not least, thank you for joining today's webinar. We deeply appreciate your interest and support in joining us to learn about exploring the journey into profession through our Careers in Peace Building Talk Story series. So